Want to listen to this Ivory Tower Boiler Room or True Crime in Academia episode ad free? Head on over to our Patreon, patreon.com/ Ivory Tower Boiler Room to listen to all of our podcast episodes without any ads. You get access to our video episodes, our bonus episodes, and even more exclusive content, including merchandise. It only starts at $5 a month, so head on over to our Patreon. Again, it's patreon.com/ Ivory Tower Boiler Room. And while you're at it, you know what would be such a help is if you could rate and review the Ivory Tower Boiler Room on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And make sure that you follow us and share out our podcast to all of your friends. It truly does help. And I want to thank you all. It means so much that you're listening to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I hope that you enjoy this episode.
The challenge for me in writing those poems is to and I don't think it's entirely possible, but to try to think as non-humanly as possible while writing about an animal or a plant, and therefore thinking about a kind of language beyond human language, which is what I've been doing in some poems that I've been working on recently, thinking about how do I write speech of this particular plant, thinking about, you'll most commonly see speech in, speech marks or italics. So I'm thinking of different ways to frame that. But certainly the ethics of plant and animal life, and also of, Grindr. Grindr is a favorite. I've been writing about Grindr for ever since Grindr appeared, and thinking certainly a lot about the ethics of Grindr.
Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Andrew Rimby, and I am so excited to be talking about Broadview Press. You might be asking, what is Broadview Press, Andrew? Broadview is an independent academic publisher in the humanities that produces high-quality, pedagogically useful books for use in university and college classrooms. They publish in the humanities, mainly English studies, writing, philosophy, and history, just to name a few genres. And recently, I had on Dr. Jason Holt, who wrote all about the philosophy of sport. And what better summer episode than to talk about what happens when a philosopher dissects the beautiful aesthetics of sporting culture. In the spring, I had on Doctors Kyle Stedman and Tanya Rodriguez to talk about what is sound writing, how to make audio projects in the college classroom, how to even have your students create podcasts. And then in the winter, I had on Dr. Jeffrey Weinstock. He talked about analyzing pop culture. Yes, I even sneak in some Real Housewives questions and how to teach composition and make it fun. He uses this whole metaphor about being a mad scientist in this Gothic lab. And in the fall, I had on Dr. Ann Stevens, and she talked about literary theory and criticism. And yes, the university season is upon us. So, what better way to talk about the college classroom than to actually understand what is literary theory? That's a wonderful episode for all of you out there who teach literary studies. I love Broadview Press. Make sure you use their exclusive code. It's Ivory Tower on broadviewpress.com. You get 20% off all Broadview Press publications. Okay, until the next Broadview Press interview. And now back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. This is Dr. Andrew Rimby, and I'm really excited because before I hit record, I was thinking to myself in my internal monologue shower from vacation that my guest has heard me talk a lot about my Atlantic City trip with the parents and the beach and still feeling the sun on my skin. And I was thinking, wait, this has to be the furthest amount I've zoomed in distance wise. And it definitely is because My guest here is actually from Queensland, Australia, which is incredible with technology. I am joined with the award-winning poet Stuart Barnes, who was born in Tasmania, educated at Monash University, Victoria, lives in Queensland. His second book, which we're going to jump right into, is called Like to the Lark. It is a poetry collection. It was published by Upswell Publishing in 2023, hot off the presses. And his first book, and the one that I really got to know him by, is called Glass Houses from 2016. It won the 2015 Arts Queensland Thomas Shapcott Prize, was commended for the 2016 FAW Ann Elder Award, and shortlisted for the 2017 ASAL Mary Gilmore Award. So, welcome to the ITBR, Stuart Barnes. Hi, Stuart.
Hi, Andrew. How are you?
Good, good. I'm so glad you're joining me here. I love when a poet is in the presence of, the ITBR's ether. It's always fun to get into a poet's mind. So I think starting
Thank
with
you.
that, before we even go to Like to the Lark, like take us back to maybe even when you were born in Tasmania. Um, I don't know when it starts for you. If it's at an early age, if it's your college education, like when did poetry, what was it about poetry? How does this even enter your life?
Okay. It did enter my life at an earlier age. Um I used to go to church with my family, and an Australian poet called Gwen Harwood, who's no longer with us, was a member of a congregation, and uh, she was she published several collections at the time, and one day she said to me in the way that adults do, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, I I really want to be a writer. And she said, you're not going to be a writer, you're going to be a poet. and I had no idea what that was. And there was a little op shop attached to the church. And after every Sunday morning mass, she'd take me down into the op shop and put a little book of poetry into my pocket and send me home, and then send me home with it and ask me to read it, and then we'd talk about it the following week. So that was I'd always loved language and reading, and my parents got me reading at a really early age. But it was I think Gwen was the first adult who asked me what I wanted to do, and then I was sort of able to join the dots between a love of reading and language and sort of the written word, and kind of honed that, and then I became really curious about what poetry was, and what poetry is, and what poetry can be. So that went on for quite a while. Yeah, while we until we left the church. Yeah, so that was the beginning. That was when it all started, at around the age of 9. The reading of and the writing of also.
Yeah, 9 is a very early age, I feel, for poetry, just because, well, I guess as children, we have nursery rhymes, they're poems. We have
Yes,
um, Mother Goose,
Mother
Dr.
Goose.
Seuss.
Yes, great
I'm
rhyme.
rhyming right now. Let's think of another rhyme there. But were you also, though, absorbing, I'm assuming, children's stories, short stories, novels? Like, were you just such a wide reader?
I was. I had really large volumes of fairy tales and different tellings of those different sort of interpretations of fairy tales. Yes, collections of short stories and novels as well. I remember over like a summer holiday in, I think, grade 6. So when I was about 11 or 12, I sat down and wrote a novella. Or I didn't know it was a novella at the time, but I just had this urge to write. And I had actually been writing from about the age of 5, just kind of making my own little books, like stapling pieces of paper together and writing. So yeah, so the desire to kind of put something down on paper was there from a really early age, and it was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Well, and when you went to college, was that you still in the forefront of your mind had creative writer printed on the forehead? Like, was that the goal in college? Is that what you majored in, was writing?
It it was. So I majored in I did a double major in literature and philosophy at Monash University, and also studied a lot of literature subjects at high school, and had really wonderful teachers. So we had not only sort of the historic components of literature and learning about literature's history, but also creative components as well. And I was sort of a straight A English student at high school, and that was a couple of teachers really took me under their wing and said, like, there's we see something in your writing, like, keep doing it. And it was the one subject, especially at high school, that I loved, or at university actually as well, that I loved more than anything else. So when I went to uni, it was a no-brainer to study literature. And I was also really interested in philosophy, which I'd studied at high school, and they seemed to be a really great pairing. So yes, so and in the meantime, I just kept writing, sort of, on the side.
Yeah, a specific philosophy, Stuart? Like, was there one that a philosophical school that you just really latched onto? And did it influence philosophy, um, your writing process? Like, do they work hand in hand?
Yes, actually, there were themes of consciousness and sentience, and I realize, gosh, it's only actually now that you've asked me that I've made this connection. It's interesting how that happens. But there are a lot of poems in Like to the Lark that I I'm sort of imagining myself, or the speaker of the poems is a plant or an animal. So I studied several philosophy subjects around that theme, and I'm now seeing that's coming out in a lot of my poetry, and more so in poems that I've written since Like to the Lark has come out. I really love thinking about how animals and plants and other beings respond to the earth and to what humans have done and continue to do to the earth.
Well, and in Like to the Lark, I feel that you're also technology seems to be really um it's hinted, not even hinted, but it is a constantly repeated theme of isolation, like feeling of the
Yes,
speaker's identity being questioned with a technological app like say Grindr, or even what it means to um connect with people, and like is technology really going to bring us there? And it does, there's a lot of ethics it seems involved in your poetry, and I was
yes,
really enjoying that because it's not, that doesn't always happen. Like sometimes the speaker becomes more um the psychology of the speaker is what a poet is more invested in, instead of say, like you're saying, an animal, plant life, technology, something that we don't always think of having an essence and identity as
yes.
humanistic. Hi, this is Andrew, and I'm interrupting what I know is an exciting ITBR episode to talk to you about one of our sponsors, the Gay and Lesbian Review. Discover new things about gay and lesbian literature, history, and culture with a subscription to the Gay and Lesbian Review, a bi monthly magazine of history, culture, and politics that publishes essays in a wide range of disciplines, as well as a slew of reviews of books, plays, and movies, and a number of special features, such as artist profiles and our popular art memo column. Each issue of the Gay and Lesbian Review brings you consistently intelligent, lively, thought provoking articles focused on a unifying theme, and it brings together the leading minds on the topic. You won't find a lot about the latest dating fads or fashion trends, but you will definitely find articles about online dating, like using Grindr as a social phenomenon, or even the gay influence on 20th century fashion. Did you know that I've actually interviewed 3 gay and lesbian review contributors? Make sure you listen to my Ignacio Darnad Breaking the Gay Code in Art episode, where Ignacio explains that key artistic figures like Michelangelo, Donatello, Thomas Eakins, J.C. Leyendecker, and Thomas Finland all have really explicit homoerotic artwork. And then head on over to the next episode where I talk with Dr. Vernon Rosario about LGBTQ psychiatry and how homosexuality got depathologized. And our most recent episode was with the Gay and Lesbian Review's literary editor, Martha E. Stone, and she talks about what LGBTQ literature you should be reading this summer, and also how to become a contributing writer and a reviewer for the Gay and Lesbian Review. To subscribe, visit glreview.org. That's GLREVIEW.org. Click subscribe and enter the promo code ITBR to receive a free copy with any print or digital subscription. And as an added bonus, you also receive online access to all of the Gay and Lesbian Review's archived issues. All of them. Okay, enjoy your reading, everyone.
Yes, yes. And I the challenge for me in writing those poems is to, and I don't think it's entirely possible, but to try to think as non-humanly as possible while writing about an animal or a plant, and therefore thinking about a kind of language beyond human language, which is what I've been doing in some poems that I've been working on recently, thinking about how do I write speech of this particular plant, thinking about, you'll most commonly see speech in, speech marks or italics. So I'm thinking of different ways to frame that, but certainly the ethics of plant and animal life, and also of Grindr. Grindr is a favorite. I've been writing about Grindr for ever since Grindr appeared, and thinking certainly a lot about the ethics of Grindr. Yes, and as you can probably tell from reading the poems about Grindr, it's not a very favorable opinion. Yeah, but
Well, do you find that it's because it does the main difference I feel from Glass Houses to like to the Lark is more of this memoir style that, and again, I know um I want you to speak to it, but you do have this very interesting method in Like to the Lark in your poetry where your own essence starts to enter, even though I wouldn't necessarily say it has an autobiographical sense, because again, like Stuart isn't really entering the scene um very vividly. Like, some poets are confessional poets, right? Like Sylvia Plath, Anne Sexton,
yes,
Adriana Rich, even we could say Allen Ginsberg. and definitely Whitman, where you really confuse the boundaries. And it seems like this is
Yes.
their autobiography of a poem.
Yes.
But you are really starting to unravel the speaker's questioning of, say, relationships. It seems more so in Lights the Lark, there's much more of an intimacy where Glass Houses, maybe even with the word house, there's more of this distance, like there's more spatial distance. Is that something you had really been cognitively processing when you were doing your new collection? Was that distancing?
It No, it wasn't a conscious thing at all, but I have since realized that I'm a lot more comfortable writing about elements of my life, and I absolutely recognize what you're saying about those differences between Glass Houses and Like to the Lark. There were certain things that I wasn't ready to. I had written about certain things, certain topics before Glass Houses was published, but I wasn't ready for those poems to be published. And I had reached a place through a lot of walking and writing and therapy where I was ready to think more deeply about and uh, write harder about those topics and um, allow those poems to be published.
Mhm.
And I'm pleased that I did. There are some poems in this in Like to the Lark that I would say are almost entirely confessional,
Mhm.
but there are certainly others that aren't. There aren't any there aren't any that are. There's no embellishment with things that are memoiristic. Um, but yes, I certainly feel a lot more, well, I guess a lot more confident in myself and a lot more comfortable. Therefore, and what's followed on from that is feeling more comfortable writing about those topics. As far as initial publication of some of those poems in journals, I was very nervous about, very anxious about some of those poems being read uh, by other people. But that's something that you have to, that I think you, well, no, I'll speak only for myself. That's something that I've had to learn um, to get used to. Um, yeah.
Well, and it means a lot that you're opening up about, say, therapy and just like processing aspects of your identity. Um, is it a was it about sexuality for you? Was it about how much you're going to share on the page? Like it seems that it's more how much of yourself you were going to put into your writing, that it was no longer just a private exploration of yourself. This was something that now almost like on social media, that there's aspects that you now put publicly out there. And once
Yes,
it's out there, you have to process, okay, well, what does this mean about crafting my identity? Like what do I not want to show? Like what's only for myself?
that's right. Absolutely. Look, a very it took me a very long time, and this had a lot to do with growing up in a really homophobic place where it was, it was. I grew up in Tasmania, and I left at 18 and moved to, um, just across a body of water to Victoria. But it was after, so it was in '97 when when homosexuality was decriminalised in Tasmania, where I grew up. It was a deeply homophobic place, and I carried that with me for a very long time. And although I've been out as gay since the age of 17, um, for a long time, I didn't want to be known as a gay writer. um, I wanted to only be identified by my name, and I carried this shame still. I realized until several years ago I carried shame of being gay, and when I first became aware, when I first became really conscious of that and started talking about that with my psychologist, and writing about that in my journal, it was it was a really wonderful moment to be able to start breaking that down and to stop, to have that moment of to really stop caring uh, so much about what people think, and to dissolve that shame.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
it's beautifully said, Stuart. And, I
thanks, Andrew.
thank you for your openness and your poetry. And again, like poetry or being a writer, I find this as even like in my academic writing, um, you see your evolution of aspects of your self identity, just like the phases that you go through. And it's
Yes,
not that one piece of writing isn't above the other. It's just it's a different part of when you were crafting. And I love how you can see that lineage. And you, it seems so clearly have analyzed or reflected on it, I'll say. Um, but like one poem that I just am deeply infatuated with is probably because of my 19th century thirst is Moby Dick or the Whale, just because I was really excited to see that Moby Dick was alluded and has a whole poem dedicated to him. But um you know, I was going to say, are you okay reading this poem aloud to the audience here? Is that
yes,
something you're
yes,
instead of I would read it, but I think it's so nice when we hear it from the poet's own voice.
sure. I'd love
Yes.
to. Yeah, thank you for asking me. I'll just find it here in the book. Oh, here we are. Okay, great. Okay, so the poem it's a pentina, and the end words are a phrase from Moby Dick. Uh, Moby Dick or the whale. I regard this as queer. Queer eye, ass. Regard this queer regard. I ass, his. I queer regard as queer this I. I regard his ass queer.
Oh, it's so wonderful, Stuart. And so the first stanza, I regard this as queer. So that's pulled from
That's
Moby
pulled
Dick,
from the
from
novel.
the
Yes,
novel. Okay,
yes.
I see. But wait, and say that again as a poetic technique. What is it called? This form?
So the form is a pentina. So it's sort of an adjustment of the sestina. So it has the five main stanzas,
Mm,
and then uh, whereas in a sestina the last stanza is 3 lines, in a pentina it's 2 lines,
mm.
um, and it has to contain the five end words, which in this poem are um, I just read it, I can't remember them. Sorry. I regard this as queer.
Yeah. Well, and
Yes.
I love that you um like adding in so as becomes as this
Yes.
his um I so there's so much. I mean, I just read this. It's so cruising, so charged, almost is the speaker, how is he processing desire or
Mm.
even what is a queer desire and thinking
Mm.
of how that's evoked in Moby Dick. And again, a novel that revolves around men on board a ship
Yes.
and um
Exactly.
like such. homoerotically charged. And I have to say, it comes right before a poem called In the Navy. So I already
Yes.
had like the YMCA song stuck in my head. Um, Hi, everyone. This is Andrew, and I am interrupting what I know is such an exciting Ivory Tower Boiler Room episode to tell you all about one of my favorite podcasts. It's called That Old Gay Classic Cinema, and it's hosted by Christian Garcia. Christian is joined with guest co hosts to talk about classic cinema films that we know and love, and he analyzes them through a queer lens. So he's talked about The Sound of Music, Alfred Hitchcock, The Wizard of Oz, Sleeping Beauty, 101 Dalmatians, and recently Hello Dolly. I actually was on his first ever episode to talk about my love of The Sound of Music and playing Captain Von Trapp in my high school musical. Then I was joined with Mary DePippi, the host of True Crime in Academia, and our friend Travis Roundtree to talk about Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo. Mary just had Christian on True Crime in Academia to talk about female poisoners, including the evil queen from Snow White and actual real life female poisoners. So, Christian's podcast is the best. You must add it to your listen list. After you listen to this episode, make sure you head over to That Old Gay Classic Cinema on Apple and Spotify. Make sure you follow him on Instagram at That Old Gay Classic Cinema. And he's also on TikTok. Don't forget TikTok. Okay, I can't wait for you all to listen to That Old Gay Classic Cinema. And now back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room.
Hey, Ivory Tower Boiler Room listeners and true crime friends. You've heard me gush over this incredible woman and her beautiful products. I'm talking about Mandy Made It. Mandy makes customized and original crochet and pre-cut goods. They are the perfect, unique, one-of-a-kind gift for literally anyone in your life. And she makes incredible home decor. I still have my pumpkins that I put out every fall. I just love them. Check her out on Instagram at MANDEE Made It or search Mandy Made It on Facebook. To order, just slide into her DMs, and if you mention the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, you will receive a free personalized gift with your first order. So, go on Instagram and look up at Mandy Made It, and Mandy is spelled MANDEE. Again, her handle is at Mandy Made It, Mandy spelled MANDEE, and order today.
But like, who is, I have to ask, so in your poem In the Navy, it says, I am Stuart Addison, Stephen Bebbington, Jay Casey, Brett Dwyer, Ewan McDonald. Who are these men?
Yes, so the poem, so they're five men who they took their own lives. So they were working in naval bases in Western Australia, so over on the west coast of Australia. And there were a number of stories coming out about methamphetamine use in the Navy and bullying and violence and men taking their own lives. And these were five men, I think three of whom were close friends, and they'd all experienced horrific bullying and violence at the hands of other people in the Navy, and had turned to substance use and abuse as a way of coping. So it's very, I like to transform. You read the title In the Navy, and as you said, you think about the Village People song, but rapidly it shifts into something very different. So the poem is dedicated to the memories of those 5 men, and there are many other men and women who've taken their own lives in the Australian Navy because of this. And it was something that in the media was really, people really didn't want to talk about it. And for me, I followed these stories closely and wanted to sort of, I guess, add another voice to that and remember the lives of those men in this poem.
Yeah, well, and remembrance seems to be a very um palpable theme, Stuart, in your like to the Lark, that like we've seen just within the Navy and then Moby Dick or the Whale, there's tension between pleasure and between um well, there's the pleasure of queerness in a way, but there's also not with doesn't have to be with queer identity, but um that spaces, right, the boating culture, so to speak, or this like, you know, Navy boating experience that we is so idealized in Moby Dick. In reality, there also can be the other side. There can
That's
be
right.
that anxiety. There's the a self torture of, like you said, how are you going to cope with feelings of angst or mental health that's going
Yes.
on? And was that kind of tension something you would just really needed to explore? Like you even do this with themes around AIDS remembrance, but also next to the decadent aspect of hookup culture with Grindr and the beauty that can happen with the body. Like that the beauty of
Yes.
the body, there's pleasure, and then there's also pain that happened with AIDS. So yeah, it's so fascinating, Stuart.
Thanks, Andrew. Look, remembrance has always been really important to me, I mean, writing is, one of the best ways of remembering and acknowledging and continuing the stories of people who have died, of plant and animal species that are vulnerable or near extinction or are extinct. And I love writing about those voices as well. But it's always been, especially, HIV/AIDS, having, there's a couple of poems in this book that are about a former partner who died of AIDS-related illnesses. And it was very important to write about a couple of moments of our time together, and also, the book is, one of the dedicatees of the book is that person. And for me, it's always been, I think part of this is growing up on music. I love the music of The Cure, which explores, like extremes like joy and sorrow. And a song like The Cure's In Between Days draws together like such upbeat music and pairs it with despairing lyrics. And I know that's sort of, there's that insistent pulse of influence of that on my poetry. I've always been drawn to kind of weaving those, I guess, sort of coming back to specific poems, those things of pleasure and pain together. I mean, for a long time in the gay community, my experiences were of, the there were experiences of partying and that sort of being the extent of the gay community, but and the more the psychological. So there was, what am I trying to say? There was an emphasis on the physical, but not the psychological. And I'm trying to sort of rebalance that in some of these poems. We're whole beings. We're not one or the other. And I think it's important to have balance of, well, I'm not saying we have to have pain, but I think that there's certainly a balance of pleasure and pain. Everyone experiences pain and everyone experiences pleasure, and it's also important for me to acknowledge and write about those things coexisting.
Yeah. Well, and I sometimes have thought about like my own experiences with especially gay intimacy, that some of the most philosophical conversations that I've had, while not, in this space, while not on the podcast, is why is it that after an intense, pleasurable, sexual, climatic experience, a philosophical conversation is then had? Like, does the sex um open up the intellectual conversation, and is it a necessity? Like, does that physical experience have to happen for then the conversation to occur, or could the conversation occur before? Like, what is the foreplay? Is it the sex or is it the conversation? And
Yes,
yeah.
yes. I completely relate to this because I've had um, most of the sexual experiences I've had that are deeply pleasurable will lead to those philosophical conversations. And I've often thought too, would this conversation be happening if that sexual experience hadn't happened? Yeah, and I think that's why I explore Grindr and other
Mm.
technologies in my work as well, because I remember years ago going out to gay pubs, but pubs especially, where it was brighter and the music wasn't as loud as the music in a club, so you could actually have a proper conversation with someone. And people were fully clothed or half clothed, but there were no photos of genitals being sent through on Grindr, and there was some mystery. And so I found many years ago that those conversations preceded sex and physical intimacy, whereas I find now that on the whole, mostly, there's been that flip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and I wonder if, again, and I always think, okay, so this is probably happening with the straight community as well, right? I mean,
Yeah.
unless, like, is it so I think easily we could say this is a gendered phenomenon. Like, is it a male condition for men to not express all aspects and especially be emotionally or intellectually vulnerable? That, like, the sex opens up their vulnerability. I mean, like, could
Yes.
be one analysis and testing that hypothesis. But another is, are people just erotic conversation is always or the erotic possibility is part of a lot of spaces, like you said, in a bar. Like, I mean, I'm sure
Mm,
that's in the back of um anyone who's physically attracted to someone else or thinks there might be a connection,
mm,
like might be really watching how they talk or what they say. Like there's a type of wooing or like making sure that you're
yes,
coming off in a certain way. Like crafting our, yeah, feel that crafting your personality is part of so many spaces. And
it is.
like yeah, and eroticism is part of that recipe, but also, are you trying to impress an employer or are you trying to impress a friend? Like, do you want to be in a certain social class? Like, do
Yes,
you feel like an imposter somewhere in your in the way that you're presenting yourself? Now, that's why the identity is fascinating and how we
isn't it? Yep.
converse. It is.
Yes.
So, but that's why, but I love that you brought up music because there is one poem. I think it's short enough for you to read, but there's one poem. I'm trying to get to the exact title, but you like combine all these different music genres. I want to say there's goth is in the title.
Sex and drugs and goth rock and synth pop and hip hop and new wave and funk slash soul guzzle.
LGBT stories are universal, but each one speaks to the individual heart and soul of the writer telling it. Do you have a story to tell? Or have you been moved recently by an LGBT book, film, painting, television show, or other form of media? Then the Gay and Lesbian Review wants to hear from you. The GNLR believes in bringing awareness to queer art and artists through reviews, commentary, and thought pieces in which the author relates their personal lives to a particular piece of art, a novel, a movie, or what have you. In addition to the print magazine, the GNLR also publishes articles on its blog as well as personal essays on its popular Here's My Story section on glreview.org. That's glreview.org. To learn more about submitting an article for the GNLR, visit their writer's guidelines. The link is located at the bottom of the homepage. And if you have any questions, email publisher Stephen Hemrick. That's STEPHEN.HEMRICK at glreview.org. The GNLR and its readers can't wait to see what you have to say.
Yes.
Yes, so if you would delight us all in reading that, Stuart, I just find it such, because you brought up music, it's just such an evocative, and the way that it resonates is, sex, drugs, rock and roll. It has everything in the
Yes.
title.
Yes, yes, and that was the impetus for the poem. Yes, okay, thank you. I'll read it. Thanks, Andrew. So sex and drugs and goth rock and synth pop and hip hop and new wave and funk slash soul guzzle. Not even it could titillate a stiff eadult.com. We'll be there in a jiffy. Insult Charlie, Lucy, Molly, Roxy, and Tina at your own risk until we reach the cliffy, tumultuous heroin equals you owe us heroin. Vault them if you can, the squiffy, vulturous blockheads. The Goths were mocked, but Goth is an excessively sniffy subculture. Take Ultravox's Midure with a grain of salt. Divvy a salt with a deadly pepper. Got everything? Spliff, E, culture clubs kissing to be clever. Third single turn to spiffy somersault up the charts. Slave only to Billie Jean. Rave about this Ghazal's iffy penultimate stanza. Rockhamptonites mutter, sup mate, I'm amped out. Shiv multicult.
Oh,
Thanks.
it's so good, Stuart. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Well, and as we're nearing the end, which just went by so quickly, Um, I
You-
knew it would. Um, this has been so fascinating. And like, I'm just curious with finishing like To the Lark and it now being out there, newly released and out there, what is something that your audience, something that's been said to you from your readers that might have surprised you or you didn't necessarily see in your poetry, but it resonated with them and you're glad that they then gave you that feedback?
oh gosh, okay. Wow. I think the main thing would be something that you brought up earlier, which is um, talking about autobiographical or personal or things from my personal life and threading those into the poems. And I, I didn't realize that it's it's so it fascinates me that you can work on a poem and things fit, like a reader will see something in there that you don't. And I have had a number of people say to me that they appreciate um, that sort of disclosure or that revealing of the personal side. And I think you mentioned this earlier as well, that glass houses was well, that you were hinting at, that glass houses was a more sort of closed off, or sort of there was less of myself in there, but there's more of myself in this book. So that's I think the thing more than anything else that people have said about the book, and that's actually really lovely. It's a really lovely thing to hear, and more than that, that those things, those themes, especially some of the themes such as HIV/AIDS or sexual assault, that people have reached out and said that you know that they've been pleased to see someone writing about those things, and that that those poems have resonated with them. So that would be it, like the personal in the poems.
Well,
Yeah.
and are you, I know you said earlier in the conversation that you had written a novella when you were younger. And I'm just always curious when I talk to any writer, but specifically, I would say poets, because it is such a unique craft that those who get into it, um,
Mm.
and even those who are playwriters as well, that do you also still traverse in other genres? Like, are you still writing novels or have plans to go into genres other than poetry?
Oh, Andrew, it's thank you. It's a wonderful question, and you know what? I've tried to, and I just I really struggle. I really struggle with forms that are longer than poems, and there are some. I've written some long poems recently, and over the last couple of years. But I've tried to write short stories. I've tried to write reviews. I've started a novel. I did finish a memoir a number of years ago, um, uh, and a number of other short stories also. But the form that I'm drawn back to again and again is poetry. It's for its for me it's unusualness on the page. It's its musicality. Um, its beauty. It's you can go from something like Shakespeare to really experimental poetry, and that's the thing that draws me back to poetry. Like I know novels. There are novels that are written that aren't just repetitions of rectangles of text, um, and the same with short stories. And I love blurring of genre that we're seeing more and more of. But I think for me, it's the very radical way that a poem can appear on the page that keeps drawing me back. Plus, an honesty with myself that I'm just not very good at writing in other forms. So, I, I think it's important to put one's energy where one thinks it's best put. And yeah, so that's another reason I keep coming back to poetry. Look, I would love to. I wish I could write in other forms, but yeah, it's physically painful.
Well, and I would say I think that's why writers get known for specific genres. I mean,
Yes.
I'll leave it out to the audience there. You can reach out to my Instagram, Andrew David Rimby, if you know of a writer off the top of your head who can instantly um there's like one Alice Walker is coming to my mind that she's a poet, but also knowing her as a novelist. But it's rare. Like it's
Yes.
rare to find a writer who can say do playwriting, poetry, be a novelist, and write a memoir, and you know them for all of those genres. But we find
Yes.
our comfort, right? We have our
That's
cozy
right.
corner.
That's
Um,
right. That's right.
so thank you so much, Stuart. I really loved chatting with you. And how can everyone follow you on social media? Like, which social media channels would you like to share out?
Thanks, Andrew. Well, I'm on Twitter at Stuart A. Barnes, StuartABarnes. I have a website, stuartabarnes.com. I'm on Facebook also. It's been such a joy talking to you and meeting you face to face for the first time. Yeah, thank you very much for having me on the podcast and
Of course.
for a great conversation.
Yes. Well, and everyone, please um, look up and get your hands on Like to the Lark. It is what Stuart is holding right now. And it's a beautiful poetry collection. I have a link to it in the episode notes. And everyone just search up Stuart Barnes because I know he already said he's writing new poems. And
Mm,
um, I know we'll be in the process of releasing a collection again sometime
yes,
soon.
definitely.
So thank you so much. Can't wait to have you back on the show and everyone to reach out to you and to have just more of a growing audience of Like to the Lark fans and followers. So yeah, this was wonderful. Thanks so much, Stuart.
Thanks so much, Andrew. It was such a pleasure.
Okay. And bye to the listeners out there. And yeah, happy summer. Well, summer here in America. I don't want to, you know, forget the hopefully Australian listeners, Stuart's fans and Stuart's friends. Thanks for joining from Australia. Happy winter to you. Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. This is Andrew Rimby, the host and director of the Ivory Tower Boiler Room podcast. I am joined with Mary DePippi, our chief contributor and host of True Crime in Academia. Please, if you're not, make sure that you follow the Ivory Tower Boiler Room and True Crime in Academia on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok too. Remember our TikTok. That's where all the exciting video clips are posted. Make sure that you join our Patreon if you want more Ivory Tower Boiler Room and True Crime in Academia content. All the video interviews are on our Patreon. All of our bonus episodes are on Patreon. And it just means so much for you to join for $5 a month. You unlock all of our bonus episodes. And also, it just helps support the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Thank you so much for giving Mary and I a needed jolt of caffeine for coffee. Thanks for the $5. Head to patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. We cannot wait for you all to listen to our summer season. There are so many exciting episodes. And we're also celebrating 3 years of the Ivory Tower Boiler Room podcast. So, without further ado, thanks for listening. Make sure you listen to the next episode next week and have a wonderful summer season, everyone. Okay, bye now.